We'll call the City Commission meeting of April 2nd, 2019 to order. Let roll calls show that we are missing two commissioners tonight, President Decker and Commissioner Walla. First order of business, Mr. Gah, is there any changes to the order of business?
Vice President Frederick, there are no changes.
If there's no changes, any commissioners have any changes, we will look for a motion to approve the order of business.
Move to approve them.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Move on to item 2 on the agenda, the consent agenda. Any commissioner have any changes or concerns with the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Trustum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Consent agenda is approved. Looking forward, we have a 4:55 timetable agenda. In the meantime, we will work through item 3. First item in Administration and Finance, item A, Memorandum of Understanding with the United States Post Office. That's going to be handled by Ms. Murtha.
Thank you, Commissioners. With regards to this item, what you have before you is a draft, but hopefully will become a final memorandum of understanding between the city and the U.S. Post Office. And the purpose of this memorandum is to address concerns that the Post Office had that could result in interference with their customers driving through the drive-through mail slot area once the Odyssey Theater complex is built. They had initially, back when the purchase was authorized, the plat was updated, the Post Office had reached out and expressed these concerns. The city responded by incorporating into the plat itself area to address the concerns so that they would have that flow. However, since that time, the Post Office and Odyssey have entered into an agreement to have the Post Office sell their side of the vacated alleyway to Odyssey Theaters. And they are aware that Odyssey Theaters has an easement over a certain portion of land that is still owned by the city, and for which the easement grants to Odyssey for as long as the theater is operating there, that area will remain a parking lot and be free and clear and be able to be used by the public. So the MOU is to memorialize the understanding that if that the easement addresses the Post Office's concerns, however, were that easement to ever go away or lapse, that the Post Office would then again have those same concerns. And so the memorandum essentially promises that the city will let the Post Office know in the event that that easement is ever set to lapse, which could occur if a structure is built but then isn't operated as a theater. It could lapse at that point in the future. And so it's been sent to them, that they were provided with a copy. They have not responded, and so in discussions with, however, it is the MOU is consistent with the discussions over the phone that we had with the Post Office. So then consistent with the conversations with Administrator Gah regarding this matter, he indicated we will give it to them. Perhaps they will send it back signed. They may come back with comments. The Post Office has historically not been on this matter quite quick with their comments, so we're just going to wait and see. It's up to them and their time frame when they send it back. We may bring it back to you for revisions if they have substantial changes, but we hope there isn't, as again, it's consistent with the discussion we had.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Murtha. Commissioners, do you have any questions or concerns for Ms. Murtha regarding the MOU?
Mr. Vice President,
Yes, Mr. Steiner.
move to approve the memorandum of understanding.
We have a motion to approve the MOU with the Post Office
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion or concerns? Hearing none, roll call vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Trustum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion is approved. Item B on our administration and finance is the St. Joseph's Hospital. Ms. Murtha, once again.
Thank you. Commissioners, with regards to this item, at the last meeting, you approved a development agreement for the St. Joseph's Hospital development, and at that time, it was noted that in reviewing the historical documents associated with this project, that there had been an error in the legal description in the ordinance approving the planned unit development in 2015. And so this ordinance is just to correct that error in the legal description. It was essentially, it said block 4 in one location as opposed to block 14. And so the staff would request approval of this ordinance correcting the prior ordinance.
Would that be a new ordinance number then?
It would be
So-
ordinance 1671.
1671. Okay, Commissioners, do you have any questions for Ms. Murtha regarding ordinance 1671?
Move to approve, Mr. Vice President.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Ms. Trustum?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Moving on to item C, cable franchise agreements with Mid-Continent and Consolidated Cable. Ms. Murtha?
Thank you, Commissioners. With regards to these ordinances, they are essentially the same in every respect except who the cable franchise is granted to. They are also very much consistent with the prior franchise agreements that were entered into between the city and these entities. The formatting is now matching each other. The terms are the same. The only substantial difference between these franchise agreements set in ordinance and the prior ones is that the insurance provisions were updated and adjusted to reflect current reasonable amounts of insurance. So the old agreements contained insurance levels well below what it would be expected in this time frame. So $250,000 cap, for example, as opposed to $1 million per occurrence.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions regarding the two cable agreements? And this would be ordinance, I believe, 1672 and 73.
Yes.
Move to approve both ordinances. Or do you want them individual?
I think you can move them both.
Pardon?
I think you can move them both.
Okay.
So we have a
So move.
we have a motion to approve 1672 and 73. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mrs. Trustum. Any further discussions or concerns? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Trustum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes on 1672 and 73. Item D, job description, city assessor reclassification, and that'll be being handled by Ms. Nominuk. Looks like we have some technical difficulties.
Here comes help.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, Mr. Vice President, Commissioners.
Good evening.
I have before you the job description for the city assessor, and we have been asked to review the position and to do some rescoring on it. With some review with the current city assessor and the supervisor, which would be Deputy City Administrator Carlson, we have reviewed the job description and kind of brought it to the level that we felt would be what we would need to replace the city assessor if we were to go out and look for someone new to fill the position. In doing that, we did find that the job description would increase to a class 5, and it would remain an exempt position, and there would There's just one person in this role. There would not be an increase of salary to the position. We're just putting the position more in line with what we feel the duties and the needs are for the position.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions regarding the reclassification?
Mr. Vice President, I would move to approve the reclassification of the city assessor.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion or concerns? Any questions for Ms. Nominick? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. Ms. Trustum?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nominick. Item E, restaurant liquor license renewal for Secura Restaurant. Administrator Goff.
Thank you, Vice President and Commissioners. This is for the Secure Restaurant. They do on-sale and Sunday permit. This is actually a new license for an ownership change, we believe, amongst family members, but it is a change in who it's registered to. It has been checked out. The police department has done the due diligence, and everything appears intact, and we recommend
So
approval.
this is just to transfer the liquor license.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions or concerns by commissioners regarding this transfer?
Move to approve this, Vice Chair.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and second to approve the liquor license transfer for Secura Restaurant. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Trustum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, we'll move on to public safety. First item A is a report by Chief Seebach regarding the spring cleanup and meeting announcement. You don't look like Chief Seebach.
I'm going to steal his thunder. Good evening, Commissioners. This is just an announcement to say that we're having our spring cleanup meeting on April 11th at 4 p.m. at the Public Safety Center. Gives an opportunity for businesses and groups to get together, select locations, and help clean up the community. More information on spring cleanup. The dates will be May 6th through the 12th. And additional information will come out in that meeting for all other activities for spring cleanup from here until fall.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Selly? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will move on. Item B under public safety will be a report from the police, the 2018 annual report from the police department. Chief Doppinger.
Good evening, Mr. Vice President, members of the Commission. The Fire Department's always a tough act to follow, but we'll see what we can do tonight. Presenting a report with me tonight is going to be Lieutenant Mike Hannell, Investigative Sergeant Kylan Klauser, and Sergeant Brandon Stockey, our School Resource Officer. Start out with our mission statement. And my presentation tonight is going to kind of highlight some of the topics that are covered in our annual report book that you guys have in front of you. Committed to public safety through exceptional public service and community partnerships is our mission statement. In 2018, we're allocated for 61 and a half full-time positions. The 0.5 or the half of full-time employees is the officer that's assigned to do courtroom security here on Thursdays. Department staffing, we have 4 members of our department that are assigned to the administration, 1 administrative assistant, 5 detectives, 28 officers, 3 individuals in 2018 were assigned to our records division, 13 to the dispatch division, 2 animal control officers, 2 officers assigned to the drug task force, 2 officers assigned to the schools, and we have 1 intelligent analyst, our criminal analyst. And we have, like I said, we have 1 part-time person assigned to our court security. In 2018, we've seen a jump for calls of service. We actually responded to 28,509 calls for service in 2018 compared to a little over 25,000 in 2017. So it's basically an increase of about 10.98%. A call for service is anything that requires a police officer's response. It might be a proactive activity, it might be a bar check, it might be a traffic stop, it might be a call for service such as an animal at large call. 2018, accidents, we've seen a slight increase compared to 2017. Like I said, a slight increase. We're only seeing 1.22% increase between 27 and 2018. But we did see an increase of almost 17% compared to 2015. Obviously, in 2015, we definitely had a higher traffic volume through our community at that time. In 2018, we had no fatality accidents compared to 2 in 2017. We did have 3 pedestrian accidents compared to 5 in 2017. And we did have 42 injury accidents in 2018 compared to 40 in 2017. Hit and run accidents continue to remain a problem in our community. We had 244 hit and run accidents in 2018. Pretty consistent with what we've seen in 2017. And in 2018, we had 688 property accidents, which is a reportable accident, anything that has a combined damage of $1,000 or more. We did see a decrease in traffic stops in 2018, 6,123 compared to 6,359 in 2017. A decrease of about 3.7%. Arrest numbers were up. We did have 1,654 arrests in 2018 compared to 1,266 in 17. Which is an increase of over 30%. This time, I'd like to invite Sergeant Brandon Stockey to come forward and do a presentation as far as his activity in the schools.
Thank you, Commissioners. So this will be the 2018 School Resource Officer Mid-Year Report. So it's from the first day of August of school start till December 31st, 2018. So it's not a calendar year, it's just this first part of the school year of 2018. So currently we have 2 school resource officers, myself at Dickinson High School, and Officer Winery, who's at the middle school, and then we split the public elementary schools in half. Some of the things we do in the schools, we do bike safety talks to elementary age kids. We run a text a tip line, we do career fairs, DARE, Adopt a Cop events, athletic events, things like that. So we spent 687 hours in the public schools this year. We have dealt with over 200 incidences in the schools. Some trends we've seen in the schools have been mental health issues at a young age, vaping and tobacco use, assaults, disorderly conducts, unruly acts, and marijuana use. So from that first day of school in 2018 till December 31st, some of the juvenile summons we wrote to juvenile court have been 31 for tobacco, 17 for disorderly conducts, 6 for drug offense, and 6 for assaults. Some comparison from last school year, the beginning part of the year, to this current school year, the beginning part of the year, is that the Dickinson High School incidences or calls for service have went up from 44 to 95. At the middle school, calls for service have went up from 22 to 47. At the elementary schools, calls for service has gone up from 35 to 59. And then at Southwest Community High School, it stayed steady at 3. So for DARE, this is our fourth or fifth year running DARE in the middle school. So this year, December 6th, we graduated 287 kids from the DARE program. It's for 7th graders at Dickinson Middle School. We have 3 Dickinson Police Department officers trained in DARE, myself, Detective Oki, and SRO Winery. And this stopped working.
Gonna have to wing it.
Oh, there you go. Got it. So for DARE, what we teach those 7th graders are decision-making skills, facts about drugs, alcohol, tobacco, the influence of social media, regular media, music, how to resist peer pressure, ways to stay in charge of your life, and how to be a good citizen in your community. Some fundraisers that we did this last year is on October 14th. we did a fundraiser with the students, their students, and their officers at Cadova. And we ended up raising $1,145 that helped fund their T-shirts for our graduating kids. And then Dickinson Eagles Club also presented us a $500 check from their grant to help with that fund. And all right, I will introduce Sergeant Colin Clauser so he can go over the criminal investigation division.
Any questions for Officer Stocky before he steps away? Commissioners, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Stocky.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll see if this thing finally quits on me while I'm up here. So good evening, Commissioners. One of the last times I was up here in front of you guys, I was making a pitch for an additional investigative position on behalf of the police department. And so happy to be able to show you the numbers today and hopefully make you feel really good about you guys moving forward with that decision and supporting us in that in this 2019 budget. So overall cases, as you can see there, with 2018 as it stood, we had 5 investigators, just as a reference, but we were up about 77 on our total incidents that we were involved in and handled for the department. Of those, kind of a breakdown of a few of the important ones, 61 of them, agency assists, we were down a little bit for the year in that. Our walk-ins were significantly up, and walk-ins are going to be any numbers that the investigators dealt with directly that never touched a patrol officer, so it could be for a number of different reasons. Somebody maybe was really smart with the calling tree when they called in and they got an investigator on the phone, but like I said, there could be a number of different reasons behind that. So. One that continues to be an increase for us, that it's not big, but it is important to show, is the call-outs being at 57, which is an all-time high for us, which we're at over 1 a week, where our investigators are getting called out to assist and support the patrol division in incidents that, whether they be over their head because of the difficulty of it, or it's a major crime, a few different things could fall into that category. But we have continued to see an increase every year for the last 5 years, and those are usually always major crimes in that instance. So, and a decrease, which was surprising for us when we got into the numbers, was the digital forensics, down 40 on that. And digital forensics, that entails our investigators pulling hard drives, doing downloads of cell phones, retrieval of data of sorts. And so that was down slightly for 2018. For the community purpose here, they always enjoy asking this question, is how many sex offenders do we have in Dickinson? You know, on any given day, we're about that 65-ish mark. At the time we generated this, it was 66, but that could swing 3 to 5 on any given day, coming and going. They're pretty fluid and in and out of the city to the county and so on and so forth. So part of the responsibilities for the investigative division, we do all the background investigations on our new officers, one of which being sworn in here tonight. That includes polygraphs, manual backgrounds, sending them out into the communities, interviewing neighbors and such. On average for each investigator, on any given day, they're running between 15 and 20 cases. And so that's pretty good. It'd be better to see that number at about 10 to do a little bit better work, but right now we're about 15 to 20. And so, and training hours there, as you can see, we get our detectives about 114 hours of average training each guy, and that is because of the specialty, of course, and so what each guy is asked of them after they're into the investigative division. Some of the our highlights, some big cases for the year that people sometimes want to know about. Without getting into obviously full summaries of everything, some of our bigger ones last year, we had for the first time in our division's history, a rather labor-intensive cyberstalking case that involved 2 to 3 months of investigative work, nearly 20 subpoenas and/or search warrants to get to the bottom of an individual who was cyberstalking another individual here in town. Very complicated case to get through, IP addresses and all that sort of stuff, tracking and such. So very fun one to be a part of, though, as it was one of our first. We had a Tinder rape case, and we had a victim make contact with a suspect through the Tinder app. Ultimately, we're able to get that case charged out, AA felony, as you can see there, GSI, a misdemeanor sexual assault. Our ICAC people.
Officer Clauser.
Sure.
It's 4:55. Timetable, can you hold that thought?
Yep, I sure can.
All right. Our 4:55 timetable will be the swearing in of Officer Jason.
Zucchini.
Okay.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to have the opportunity to introduce to the commission and to the public our newest officer of the Dickinson Police Department, Jason Zucchini. If you want to stand up, Jason. Tonight he has his wife Diana with him. Jason comes to us from the state of California by the way of Dickinson State University. He came to Dickinson State University on a wrestling scholarship and earned a bachelor's degree in psychology. This time I'd like to invite City Administrator Mr. God to come down and swear Jason in, please.
All right, I'll hand you that, and you can follow along. What we'll do is I'll say a few words and you'll repeat, and then when you're done, you can take that up to the podium and sign it and address the commission, tell them a little bit about yourself. So start off, I and your name.
I, Jason Zucchini,
Will support, obey, and defend
will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution and the laws of the United States,
the Constitution and the laws of the United States,
the state of North Dakota,
the state of North Dakota,
and the city of Dickinson,
and the city of Dickinson,
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
and that I will strive always
and that I will strive always
to meet the highest ethical standards
to meet the highest ethical standards
implicit in my employment
implicit in my employment
and in furtherance of the best public interest.
and in furtherance of the best public interest.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome. You can take that with you
Okay.
and sign it and then hand it back to us.
Well, I'm Jason Zucchini. I came here from Central California. I've been wrestling just about my whole life, and I took that route to actually work my way through college, and I wrestled in Sacramento City College, where I graduated from there with an associate's degree in criminal justice, and I got picked up on a scholarship to wrestle here at DSU, and me and my wife are really fortunate to be out here. She actually took the leap and moved up here with me, so I'm appreciative of that. And after living here for a couple years, I just feel really ingrained in this community, and I'm really appreciative to have this opportunity to work for Dickinson with all the great people out here, and it's just a great environment to start a family in. Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome to the department. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
Resume.
We have a couple minutes. Officer Clauser, if you can come back to the podium.
Part 2. Okay. So just moving down the list there, as you guys can see, we have 2 individuals that are ICAC operators, I'm going to call them. So they do internet crimes against children, and they reach out to our schools and our youth to educate parents and the students about internet safety and the dangers that lurk out there, which obviously some of you may know as parents right now are, it's incredible. So anyways, we spoke to about 400 students about that, and the scam property recovery, about $15,000 in illegal laptops we intercepted that were purchased fraudulently. And Badlands Crime Stoppers got back up and running, and the investigative division took the lead on that to get everything back in line. I spoke to the commission about that specifically at a prior meeting. But we had a sex trafficking operation that took place near the end of last year too, that we worked with the FBI and BCI, which it's a victim recovery operation. So they come together, they work together to not necessarily seek out Johns, but to make contact with potential victims of human trafficking and to try to exert them, get them out of that field. And they were able to make contact with one on this operation. That thing went big. That thing went haywire. I wonder if we got a battery issue. I think I'm going to run into your next timetable, Chair. Are you helping me out there, Rita? Okay, Jacob, okay. Yeah, next one, Jacob. So we had a really large prescription counterfeit ring where we had individuals that were making counterfeit IDs and counterfeit prescriptions, passing them around town, attempting to get all kinds of different medications. It stemmed into Burley County, Bismarck, across the state, and we were ultimately able to get criminal charges on both of them, as a male and a female involved in that. We had a
I need to hold you up again.
to be
5
continued.
o'clock. Move on to our 5 o'clock timetable item, which is an annual report from the museum. Director Furman.
I think we're going to kick you down. There we go. Mr. Vice President, Commissioners, good evening.
Welcome.
We can at least start out with the lights on. It'd probably be easier for me to read my notes that go with these slides. Jacob, are you just going to run me through the slides as we go through? I don't know if I trust this thing. Let's give it a shot. Okay. First, I'd just like to mention that we are continuing to see growth in the museum activities. Our attendance has continued to trend upward. In 2018, we were up 24.67% over 2017, which of course was the first full year of operation that we had in the year-round configuration. For the first 3 months of 2019, we are ahead of last year's pace by 30.66%. To have a good January and a good February for a museum, especially in our climate, is really pretty remarkable. And March turned out to be a really terrific month as well. With that attendance growth, are you with me? With our attendance growth, we also have revenue growth. Attendance revenue was up 25.39% over from last year. Gift shop sales up over 20%, and spending per guest had a little bit of a drop last year, but through the end of March this year, we're up to $4.45 per person who buys a ticket, which is really actually pretty good. When I was a boy in museum school, you were lucky if you got $2 a guest. So this is a nice trend to see continuing upward for us. Our memberships in 2018 also up about 30%. Most of those are $50 family memberships. That's by far our most popular category. And we will see those people as repeat visitors, and they like to take advantage of that 10% discount in the gift shop as well. We're down a little bit with our rentals of the church and the pavilion last year. However, this year we are starting on trend to be back to where we were probably in 2017. That's not a huge part of our income, but it's just nice to know that people in the community want to take advantage of our facilities. Our donation boxes were down in 2018, which was a little bit disappointing, but we are trending a little bit up this year. But I think what's important to talk about in donations are the other types of donations that we get. Besides donations of artifacts and fossil specimens and what have you, we had $5,850 contributed last year specifically to support our paleo fieldwork program. These were individuals, many of whom also came out to the field as volunteers, who gave $500, $1,000. We had a $2,000 donor in there, and that just shows that people are really behind what we're doing out in the field. I say we, what Denver's doing out in the field for the paleo program. Also, the Stark County Historical Society and the Southwest North Dakota Museum Foundation, our two advisory boards, have contributed a total of $36,289 to completely support the photo collection scanning tech position since 2017. They are committed to continue their support through the end of 2019 and possibly beyond. As you know, that photo collection is a bit of a revenue generator for us, and it's also an important part of preserving our local history. We go ahead to youth programming. Here, things are going along really well. You'll see that we're about 300 ahead of last year. It was about 300 ahead on the Toddler Tuesday programs, which continue to be very popular. And actually, almost probably a little over the 200 level right now through this first 3 months. We will be taking May off for Toddler Tuesdays. We do that every year because it's school tour time. And that, of course, is another important part of our youth programming. We went from 20 groups in 2017 to 24 groups in 2018. And already today I had 5 more added to my calendar for next month. So we're hoping to see growth in the school tour business as well. We continue to participate in National History Day. This year, we went from 58 last year to 59 students just this year. That doesn't seem like a really big increase, but last year it was actually 2 schools that participated. A school outside of Stark County dropped out this year because their National History Day advocate left her job there and got hired in Dickinson schools. So with the 59 we handled this year, they were all from the Dickinson Middle School. Great group of kids, some real interesting projects, and we are working with them to move forward with that next year and hopefully even expand it into the high school. I know there's some interest there as well. Off-site programming, the last 2 years we've done 500 students served at Prairie Rose Elementary. We anticipate that they will probably call us again this year. One of the nice things is we had our school added for off-site programming this year. Just last week, our paleontologist, Dr. Fowler, spent the day in beautiful Beulah, North Dakota, serving 300 kids in their elementary school. So we're real excited about the growth that we're seeing in the youth programming. Just some of the other things that we've done this last year. Of course, our fieldwork report last fall, that was our second annual one. Denver's going to give you some information on some of the things that they're doing this year that are going to be reported on in fall later when they get back. But we also were there for Dickinson Museum Night at the Badlands Big Sticks game. We had our annual fundraising murder mystery party in January. We had the DSU Centennial exhibit hosted in the Yoakum side of the museum. And then also we just brought 2 art shows into the Yoakum activity. The one was the Badlands Art Association, and then also we had the traveling student art show that went throughout North Dakota, which also included some of our local students. That whole presentation of art goes back really to some of the roots of what they were doing in the Yoakum Museum when it was originally opened in 1983. Just to catch you up a little bit, we've been doing some things in Prairie Outpost Park over the last year. Our farmhouse porch repairs were completed. Our maintenance man, Doug Kostelecki, working along with a Experience Works volunteer, took care of porch repairs that we had a quote for that was nearly $10,000. They did it for about 4. So we're really happy with that. Also, we had restoration of the school bell tower. Security cameras were installed in the park by our IT department. That addresses some concerns we had with some vandalism in the park. And then we are also just about that far away from getting new lights along the walkway. I say new lights, and that should be in quotes, because those are repurposed lights from downtown. Whenever Walter would cut loose a light, we'd be able to add a new one up there. So I mentioned the advisory boards before, just to give you an idea of some of the things they're working on fundraising now. They held their second print auction to support the museum. They are not only supporting the museum with the scanning tech, but they've also committed money to our fieldwork program the last summer and then going into this summer as well. And they are also targeting area businesses to raise funds, not just for the paleo side, but also for the history side. And we hope to see some of those dollars help us restore buildings like the depot, the South Hart Depot up in the park. The last one, this is actually my turnover to Denver. This is the Lansendorf National Geographic Paleo Sculptor Prize winner. Denver is going to talk a little bit about that, but it's awful interesting for a museum, small museum like us, to actually have in our collections a national award-winning piece of dinosaur sculpture. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, Sarah, I know you have, but if you haven't had a chance to see it, there are some really terrific pieces of art and science. So with that, I'm going to sit down and rest my voice and let her take over and walk you through what's going on with paleontology.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got 2 or 3 slides to show. There we go. Oh, does the clicker work?
Now, why don't we turn the lights down?
There we go. So I'm going to be showing you a few things, a little bit about what we did last year and some of what's going on in the museum. Yeah, it's going back. Okay, so there's just a few of the people you'll see. There's me at the top there. There's my wife who teaches at the university, but she's also a paleontologist. And then one of my field crews been around for a few years and has prepped a few things in our laboratory is Jack Wilson. Just adding that just yesterday our full-time preparator started in the lab. That's Dara Stefan. She's not in the slideshow because she only started yesterday, but I'm sure the next time I do this I'll have all sorts of photographs of the great fossils that she's cleaning up. And she's already done a few things and they look great. So we started off Kennedy Coulee. This is in northern Montana, north central Montana, finishing off this site called Ankylomania. So this is the site that we dug up in 2017, and it's this dinosaur here. It's a armored dinosaur called a nodosaur. And our site was interesting because our specimen is about 3 million years older than its nearest relative, so it's going to be a new taxon, or it's going to extend the range of a known taxon significantly, so it's well worth digging up. So this is where we went back to. We dug an even bigger hole this year, and we found a few things. We got all the best parts last year, so this year we got this beautiful armor plate. This was found by Destiny, who's sitting there next to Bob, who's one of the volunteers in our lab and is also on the museum board. So this is an armor plate from the neck area. And we also had a bunch of tyrannosaur teeth turn up, giving evidence that the carcass was fed on by some tyrannosaurs. So this is the skull that we collected in 2017. That's been prepared a little bit in the lab, so here's the progress on that skull. And you can even see the teeth inside the jaw. So it's a beautiful skull, and Dara started work on that today, so we're already seeing progress on this skull being finished. The skull, really important bone. If we go back one, thanks. So this is some of the bones that we've collected so far. On the right-hand side, you can see both of the humeri, a few ribs and a radius at the top, and then all sorts of armor plates and ribs on the left-hand side. Next slide. And so this is what we've got of the skeleton. The bones that we've got are in red. So we have all the leg bones, but we only have one of the toe bones for some reason. Don't know where they are. We have the upper part of the skull, most of the big armor plates, but most of the smaller bones seem to have been washed away. That's not too much of a problem because the most important bones are the ones we've got. So that's really cool. Next slide, please. This is an example of kind of what we want to do. We're not too far off this. This is a specimen in New Mexico that we saw last fall. So this is a very simple exhibit to put together. So our immediate plans: get the skull, get those big neck plates on exhibit. Hopefully we'll be able to do this either in time for the summer or maybe in the fall when that skull is finished. Next slide. But this is kind of what we'd like to do in the future. This is a full skeletal mount of one of these armored dinosaurs. Gaston Design is a company in Utah that has quite a few of these available. So we would buy the bits that were missing. So we'd buy copies of the feet, we'd buy a bunch of ribs and things like that, and get a full mount made of this new taxon. Okay, next slide. This is something else I showed you last year, I think, an unexpected bonus. Next slide. And it's a little frill bone of a ceratopsian dinosaur, one of these horn dinosaurs. So these are all tooth marks. I've marked them on in colors here. This is a T-Rex that was eating this ceratopsian, so I've been working a little bit on the research. So that little set of blue marks, I know I can fire this thing somehow. Let's try that. No, never mind. Those blue marks that you can see from the bottom right to the top left, that's the front teeth of the tyrannosaur, basically scraping the meat off the back of the skull. And most of these marks are like that too. The little dots in the corner, that's not my palette, that's the order that the marks were made. So when they crisscross over each other, you can tell which one was made first. So we can actually see the feeding pattern of one of these great big tyrannosaurs. Next slide. And the little bones that turned up in the lab at the end of last year, we didn't know what this was when we collected it because it was in a jacket. But it turns out to be the same bone from the other side of the skull, and it is similarly covered in all these awesome tooth marks. So next slide. So we're going to include those specimens as data in our study, How to Eat a Triceratops. And this is the study that we did a number of years ago, which I haven't written up yet, but we're in the process. But the centerpiece of the new Smithsonian exhibit is actually based on this picture that opens this summer. Next slide. So after a few weeks at Kennedy Cooley digging up Ancalomania, we went over to Malta. That's the yellow star. Next slide. And we looked for some new sites, and we found a few things, and we were also digging up some sites that we found previously. So this is one of our new sites. It's a little horn from a young Chasmosaurian ceratopsid, probably something similar to that picture. I hope we'll be able to get some more of that this year, but we didn't know where it had come from. It had all fallen out of a cliff, and we found the pieces at the bottom of the cliff. But I think I've got a better idea of where to look. Next slide. Lots and lots more exciting looking teeth. Pointy bits are always fun, but lots of microsites with a lot of this ecological data. So we had a few more sites like that. Next slide. You might remember this from last year. This was the arm that I carried in. Next slide. So here's the arm that I brought in last year. We were hoping to find the rest of this arm. You might remember it has some mummified skin preserved around the finger and all across the metacarpals. This is off a duck-billed dinosaur. So we went back to the site this year. Next slide. We dug a big hole in the ground hoping to find the rest of the skeleton. Maybe it was there. Next slide. We got one block. So there's that block there on the left-hand side. So it's a scapula, it's basically the shoulder, the coracoid, and the upper part of the humerus. But there were no ribs underneath the scapula, so basically this is an arm that was ripped off a duck-billed dinosaur, which is fairly unusual since it's got the skin preserved, just to have an arm on its own, but maybe it met an angry Wookiee or something, I don't know. But it's on its own, that's what we've got. So next slide. So we're working on getting that on exhibit. I'll hopefully have this up for the summer. We've got a nice case for it. We just got to build a base. The left-hand block might not be finished prep by then, but certainly the right-hand side will be up. And people will be able to get really up close, nose really close to those skins. You can see the scales. It should be really awesome. Or if you want to see it now, you should come to the museum and come to the lab. I'll show it to you. Okay, next slide. So our main event for the summer was Denver's Tyranno. This is what we found last year with these feet that were sticking out of the cliff. We were really hopeful that it was going to turn into a whole skeleton. We collected some toe bones. We collected a claw. We were very, very hopeful. Next slide. We wanted something like this. So obviously this is one of the best dinosaurs found in North America. It's an opisthototic tyrannosaur. Its neck is pulled back. Its tail is all pulled back. I was hoping for this. Next slide. So we started off with digging 10 foot of overburden. Next slide. And we dug down a bit further. Next slide. And here we are digging at the bone layer. What became very quickly obvious that we weren't expecting is the area where the bones were expected to be was filled with this big concretion. This is this big mound that you can see in the middle here. So we worked largely on bones that were sticking out around the concretion, and we found a whole bunch of great stuff. So next slide. So this is the wishbone. A number of years ago, there was a debate over whether birds were dinosaurs, and the absence of a wishbone in dinosaurs was said evidence that they weren't, but they do have wishbones, and this would have been an amazing find 20 years ago. And it's still a beautiful thing today, so that's a really important thing to find. Next slide. We had parts of the feet. Some of them had washed out already that we'd collected, but these are the feet here. Next slide. And loads of belly ribs, 38 belly ribs. All very, very delicate. These have not moved far. The big bone you can see in the center there is actually a scapular coracoid. That's the shoulder blade. Next slide. And this is the articulated tail. Or it's the middle third of the articulated tail. Next slide. So this is the block from above. Next slide. And these are the bones highlighted that we I just showed you. And so next slide. This is basically what we think is going on. I'm pretty sure that we have the whole thing as we hoped. Well, it was a big hope, but there was a really good chance of it, and it is that way. So you can see the concretion is encasing most of the bones. We can see the ankle and the toe bones at the bottom. Those are exposed. We've got the tail emerges from the concretion where we can see the middle third of the tail that you can see there. Then the tip of the tail goes back into the concretion. The middle block is shaped exactly as we would expect if the rest of the skeleton is there. I expect the vertebral column is in place and the head is probably in there as well. There's even a bulge at the top. It's just the right place for the bulge in the neck, the way that there's been quite a few specimens found like this that we expect. The reason why those gastralia, those are the belly ribs, they're like a special sort of basket of ribs that you get on the belly area. As with any carcass that's lying there for a while, it starts to rot, those decomposition gases build up, and the belly just blows out. So that's what we think has happened here, that it blew up like a balloon, its belly blew out, all of those belly ribs moved about 3 feet, 4 feet out away from the body. It actually blew the shoulder blade off from the underside and the wishbone as well. And the ribs that we were starting to find in the concretion just above that shoulder blade were a lot thicker. They weren't belly ribs, those were probable neck ribs. So this is what we probably have. But because it was in a concretion, we couldn't get it all out this year. Next slide. But we did take out everything that was exposed. So we have all of these bones back at the museum, and we're starting to work on them now. Next slide. And what was left there in the concretion, we started to have a go with some rock cutting saws that we bought that will thin down the concretion, hopefully take about 12 inches off the top of it to lighten the load. Next slide. So that next year we can helicopter it out. We have a couple of hopeful leads on this. The BLM use a sky crane like this quite regularly, so we're hoping that we could work with the BLM to sky crane the thing out. We may have to contribute some money towards the fuel of that sky crane, but that's one option. We're hoping that can happen. We're hoping we can helicopter this thing out this year, but if we have to wait till next year, then we can get more dinosaurs than just the ones we have. But the other option that we're pursuing right now is getting a Chinook helicopter from one of the military bases in Montana, and they're very positive about it right now. So we need a big helicopter to get this thing because it is very, very heavy and it's very, very big. But we're pretty confident we can do that because it should be very special. Next slide. One issue we do have, though, is that the thing is so big it may not fit through the doors of the lab. Even if we take the doors off the hinges, it's going to be a squeeze. I won't say it won't fit yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't. We can prep it in another building, but it'd be really nice to be able to have it prepped in our prep lab. And this is aside from the fact that we've got to get it into the museum as well, which also has the same kind of door width problems. But that's a great problem to have. If we have an awesome complete dinosaur that doesn't fit through the doors, I think we'll find a way. Next slide. So hopefully, a few years' time, a couple of years maybe, we really, really could have something this amazing here in Dickinson. Like, one of the nicest things that maybe you could see in this whole region we could have right here. I'm very hopeful. Next slide. So a few other things that we're doing in the museum and some future plans. Next slide. This is some stuff going on in the lab right now. The bottom left corner is a cast of a specimen I found in 2008. I got this on a special deal because I found it, so I kind of twisted their arm. So that'll be on exhibit this summer. It's the most complete skeleton of a young Triceratops that's been found. It's kind of cool because the horns point backwards when they're young, so it's a little cutie. The top right is something that we've been working on that Destiny's been cleaning up. Destiny's just sat there again. And this is a large, really big Triceratops, back half of a skull we collected a few years ago. And you can see there's like a rounded hole forming in the frill, which is actually a really critical, very much argued about feature. So some scientists will probably be keen to come here and get really angry about seeing that. But it's quite important for a current hypothesis about these horned dinosaurs. Next slide. In October of last year, we got approved for federal repository status, so that was such a huge deal. It's an awful lot of pieces of paper, but what it means is that the things that we collect can stay here in Dickinson. They can be in the museum as long as we are open as a museum, and we can start putting numbers on them. We can really call them Badlands Dinosaur Museum specimens. They'll have our name stuck to the front, so that's really cool. Next slide. Coming up this fall, September 14th and 15th, we are running a research symposium. This is going to be hosted at DSU. And our co-host is obviously us at the museum and also North Dakota Geological Survey. We're going to be running field trips. We're hoping we'll get, I don't know, somewhere between 25 and 100 people coming to Dickinson to present paleontological research. And there'll be some public events associated with that as well. Next slide. Some upcoming research projects. We're looking at how old our Tyrannosaurus is. This is with Dr. Holly Woodward in Oklahoma State. Next slide. So we chopped up our Tyrannosaur leg bone, took out some chunks in the middle, sent them down to Holly. Next slide. And we're starting to get the first results. Next slide. So this is a close-up of the fibula. You can see all the bone cells. These are actually called Haversian canals. And this is secondary bone growth as the bone grows and changes. What we're looking for is, next slide, this is a different bone from a different animal, but we're looking for these growth lines. So you can count the rings in a leg bone just as you can count the rings in a tree. So this is a dinosaur that died at the age of 14. We know these growth rings are in our Tyrannosaur because we saw them when we chopped the chunks out in the middle. So we're going to be able to see how old our Tyrannosaur was shortly. We're going to be getting the data for this summer and probably this fall. Next slide. We went to St. Louis. Dr. Ashley Morhart invited us there in October. We took one of the brain cases from our collection of a Triceratops and we CT scanned it. So we now have a 3D model of the Triceratops's brain. Next slide. So we're going to put it on display around the back of Bill. So this is Bill with his new case around him. The brain case is going at the back near where Bill's brain would be. Next slide. And this is the steel mount that we've had made for that brain case. And it's been made by Tom Krebs, who's an artisan welder in town. I didn't know about Tom until just a few months ago, but I am so pleased to have found him. His work is really good. Just the fact that I can call him up and ask him to make me some funny shaped mount for a funny shaped bone is just, it's a great weight off my mind, and it means we can do so much more at the museum. Just mounting things beautifully that are weirdly shaped. So I'm very much looking forward to working with Tom over the coming years. Next slide. Another piece of research got in the news. October last year we presented on this fossil owl. This is basically the only decent fossil owl anyone ever found. We didn't find this one. It's from Wyoming, but we've been working on it for a couple of years. That's a complete foot. That's a complete skull. This is the most primitive owl ever. It was really weird. It was probably living during the day. It had these big shades over its eyes, and it had a number of other weird features, very unlike other owls. The paper for that will be submitted later on this year, and it should make a pretty big splash when it comes out. Next slide. Also working on a specimen from Dickinson. So this is our Triceratops. You've probably seen it a million times when you come to the museum. I was in the sandpit looking at it, dusting it, I think, and noticed that some of its tail bones were all fused together. So I brought in Matt Ely's from University of North Dakota, and he's describing this co-ossified mass of the tail. The short story is that something bad happened to this poor Triceratops. His name is Larry. And his tail would have had like a 90-degree kink in it at the very end. Either that or it was completely cut off at the end. So a rather sad story, but it's a really cool story and it gives it some character. We're getting a nice portrait done of what Larry would have looked like, probably rather sad with his broken tail. But a Dickinson specimen, this one's from North Dakota as well, and some research. I've almost finished that paper with Matt. We're going to have that submitted very shortly, a few weeks' time. Next slide. We moved some of our older dinosaur models to Prairie Hills Mall, where they've got a new lease of life, advertising for the museum and giving the kids something to look at. It's really cool. Next slide. And we moved in our new feathered dinosaur models, which hopefully people will have seen. Next slide. And of course, I was down at a meeting last year, October of last year, when we Bob Boban's models won, so I was accepting the award on behalf of Boban. But it was a thrill in my life to go up on stage, and my little mono, my favorite model, won the prize. So that's an international award-winning prize. I was saying last year these are the best feathered dinosaurs you can see anywhere, and it was really nice to have that demonstrated by this award. Next slide. So the big future, last couple of slides I've got then. I just want to to put out some of the ideas that I've got for what we want to do with the museum, you know, because as we're developing the exhibit and finding specimens, we got the kind of two kinds of exhibits that we want to do. One is new discoveries from research and field work. So these are kind of specimen driven, and hopefully stuff like this amazing Tyrannosaur and some of the other things we've found. That's kind of classic museum exhibits. The others are these immersive exhibits, and it's been a thing in retail that as retail is evolving right now, you have to have experiential retail, turning shopping into an experience, and museums are very much the same. We really want to bring the visitor into the exhibit instead of them just looking into a box, like take them into the box. So I have a couple of ideas. Well, I've got the 5 immersive exhibit ideas, and I'll have many more, I'm sure, as we develop these things, but I wanted to walk you through a couple of them. Next slide. So the first one is about some new specimens we have of small dinosaurs that raise their young in burrows. Different actually from this picture, but this is just an example of another one. So we're building an exhibit right now with Boban the model maker, where the visitor has to actually climb into the exhibit. The kids have to crawl on their hands and knees into the burrow, and they stand up and they see the babies and they see the adults and all, even things like little mammals that probably lived in the same burrow structure. This is a piece of research that I'm going to present at our symposium this fall, and hopefully it'll make a bit of a splash, and we'll get the paper off by the end of the year. But it's absolutely fantastic. We have 3 sites that show this. They live kind of like prairie dogs. They have examples of communal burrowing, babies of different growth stages, really awesome stuff. So it'll be an exhibit where they go through the burrow and then they emerge and they see a dinosaur attacking them, because we have evidence that just like coyotes have a go at prairie dog villages, we have evidence that carnivorous dinosaurs are visiting these dinosaur burrow sites. So contrasting the claustrophobia of being stuck in a burrow, we have the American Jungle exhibit. Next slide. And so this is a bit more preliminary idea, but we have 2 tree trunks. And these are supposed to show the forest floor 40 million years ago when North America was covered with this tropical forest. This is where this owl fossil is from. So when you're on the forest floor, you see all these weird mammals and things that lived there. And then you climb up a spiral staircase that goes up the tree trunk until you reach the canopy at the top, when you can see a mural of a volcano erupting. Which is where all this ash came from, which is one of the reasons why we have all these beautiful fossils. They were buried in volcanic ash. And so you walk across the canopy and then descend down another tree trunk. And this was kind of a bit of a pipe dream for a while, but like meeting with Tom Krebs, like one of his specialist things is railings and stairways. So I've been working with him a little bit, just asking like, what would it cost to actually produce this kind of thing? So this uses vertical space in the museum. It puts the visitors inside the exhibit. It's just different. It's different from the sort of stand and look in a box kind of thing. So that's just a couple of the ideas of where we want to go with some of the exhibits. Burroughs is on its way. We are working on it right now, and a whole bunch of other ideas for other things. I think that's my last slide. Do I have another one? Yes, I have acknowledgements. Many people to thank, of course, for funding, and Fossil Prep, especially Destiny down there, and my field crew, lots of volunteers and donors, and Bureau of Land Management. Most of our fossils come from public land, which is why we don't have to pay for them, so it's really great to be able to keep working on public lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fowler.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Fowler or Mr. Furman? Museum Director Furman?
So is a lot of your time during the winter spent here in Dickinson, where people can come and ask you questions? And
Yeah, we have people coming by the museum asking questions or getting rocks and discoveries identified. I had a guy come in today with some fossil wood he wanted identifying. The winter is obviously a good time to build exhibits, to clean up the fossils, to write them up, all that kind of thing.
Oh, very interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, some exciting times at the museum, for sure. Okay. No, you don't get to go. It's the 5:30 timetable agenda. We have a presentation by Dickinson Public Schools, Dr. Sean Hocker and Ron Doctor. Good evening, gentlemen.
Well, thank you. No, our presentation is not going to be a nice, beautiful slideshow of all the awesome things at the museum. Basically, just wanted to stand before you, give you a quick update on kind of where we're at with the proposed May 7th bond referendum for a new high school and a partial of an elementary school, and just make sure that if any councilman had any questions, anything that our goal as a district, as a committee, is to try to make sure we're answering everyone's questions so that they can make an informed decision at the ballot. So with that, Ron, do you want to give kind of a little quick highlight of where we're at, like you did this morning with the County Commission?
Thank you, Dr. Doctor, and thank you for letting us speak tonight. My name's Ron Doctor, and I'm fighting a cold, so excuse me. I was the principal at Dickinson High School for 14 years. So with that experience, I get to be the co-chair of the YES Committee in the community, so which is good. But the YES Committee primary purpose is to get information out in regard to the May 7th referendum. Information about why the bond is being asked for, the reasons behind it, and those type of things. We have lots of information out, whether it be in the newspapers or online, outlining the various things that we have information about. I personally can speak to the crowdedness or the overcrowdedness at the high school since I was there for so many years. I'm guessing Sarah could tell us about the classroom she was in when she was teaching there also. You haven't got much room. The core areas of the gymnasium, excuse me, the commons area, the cafeteria, so we just don't have any room. This past year, the Department of Public Instruction has used a new accountability method called Choice Ready. And that's based on a number of criteria. Well, the school was just notified for the 17-18 school year that Dickinson High School is in the top 10% of all the high schools in North Dakota in regard to getting their students ready in areas of essential skills, workforce readiness, and post-secondary. That's a great thing. Part of that has to do with a career and tech education program that we have. This new school is going to include a CTE center that is needed. Right now we have what I call the old yellow banana building, that if you've ever been in it, you worry about climbing the steps and coming back down without falling. We have a lot of things that need to be updated. We have a boiler in the school that is, I believe, the only boiler of its kind in the country anymore. So finding parts for that and maintaining it is very difficult. But we're out there giving information and trying to give accurate information, and because a lot of times in our social media hype that we have nowadays, the wrong information gets out there that's not accurate. So that's one of the main reasons for the YES Committee, to have a very good dialogue with people about why we need it. And there's no question about it. Taxes will go up, and we understand that, and we understand how tough they can be for people also. So thank you.
Yes, there's definitely no question that this is needed. The Dickinson birth rate over the last couple of years has been over 700, and over the last several years we've been able to track that and have a realistic expectation that approximately 80% of those numbers show up in our kindergartens 5 years later. We have no capacity right now for any grade levels sitting around 500 or 560. And that's just indicative of the exact growth that we're already experiencing. Last year we graduated 192 seniors, and we started the year with 362 kindergartners. So you can just see that there's just an ongoing continuation of numbers. The time is now to make this decision. We have documentation that shows our high school has capacity of 1,000 and documentation that shows our high school is at 1,100. So we have certainly been sharing out the larger of the two numbers. We are approaching that number right now, and in the next couple of years, by the time the new construction would open its doors, we would be at capacity. And that's not counting any additional new growth, which we've been experiencing somewhere between 5 and 10% each year. So there's no question at the elementary or at the high school levels this is absolutely needed. The elementaries as well. We're really steadily watching our kindergarten enrollments for next year already, and we've been tracking that very steady. We try to hold those kindergarten numbers right at about 20, and then we increase by 1 kiddo per grade level up through 5th grade. our kindergartners right now, every one of our kindergarten classes and every one of our first grade classes and half of our second grade classes are already over and above the numbers that we would prefer. So with this, we're asking for a $150 million bond to our voters. That's going to leave about $7 million to address an elementary school. That clearly is going to fall short of addressing elementary school, but the district feels like with the new high school, some of the deferred maintenance expenses that we had planned for the high school will be able to go towards the construction of a new elementary school. And then we have, we're optimistic and confident at the same time that, and those are the same kind of definitions of words, right? That there's donors out there that would potentially help towards projects with the high school. They just need a project in order to go to their stockholders or to their decision makers to decide whether they want to maybe sponsor a wing of the vocational building or an athletic field or something. So we also feel like that'll be a great avenue for us to apply some additional dollars to meeting those needs of the elementary school. Worst case scenario, if we do fall short of receiving the funds that we need for that elementary school, we can take the remaining funds and add on to 2 elementary schools that we have to give us a small window. Clearly, the very best plan is to build a new elementary school with potential growth onto it, giving us an opportunity to add on to 3 elementary schools over the next 10 to 15 years, as those numbers may or may not come to fruition with the anticipation of over 500 kindergartners coming in. So let me pause there for just a second and just ask, I guess, as commissioners, are there, as you're talking with your constituents and your neighbors and friends, and are there questions that they're posing that you don't have answers to that we could share with you today to help educate our community? This is a big community decision.
I guess just the stuff I'm hearing, there's concerns in the property tax increase. I've been to a couple of your guys' presentations. I mean, I see the need. This is the time that it needs to happen. How has your guys' attendance been to those community forums?
It's getting
It's
better.
been good,
every time.
yeah.
I was at some of the earlier ones and it was pretty light. I
The
was
last
just
one
wondering.
was pretty well attended, it was almost 2 hours long. And one of the things that I want to make sure people know, this is going to be a community. I mean, the school's going to be for the community.
Correct.
There's going to be a track around part of the inside of the building. I know Mr. Fiddle AD is already looking at different times so that can be opened up for people to use it. The main event center is going to seat 2,500 to 3,000 people. When I was principal, I would catch a little heat during graduation because we didn't have enough room for people to come in and sit. And this will take care of that, and I'll also hopefully host other events. But it's going to be a community-based school with lots of people being able to use it at different times. I know the Parks and Rec uses the building a lot right now, and we're hoping to continue those community-based things.
And we certainly continue to encourage attendance at our public forums. I know we've got another 3, I believe, scheduled the remainder of April. This last meeting, I know we also did a Facebook Live opportunity, and we had nearly 100 viewers on that site live at any given time, as well as approximately 100 in person. So I think our numbers are, I think the word is getting out now a little more, and people are coming out and seeking specific answers to maybe some of their questions. There's no question that taxes, that's first and foremost on everybody's mind. The reality is that's inevitable, whether it's for a new school or whether it's for, the school district's been very, very conservative over many, many years. Built Prairie Rose without asking for any, bond help. There are some tax levies that the school board could initiate without voter approval. They've chosen not to do that. But as we know, and as we've shared in these public forums, we're looking at somewhere to $40 to $50 million to essentially kick this can down the road 5 years and be faced with the same thing. During that 5 years, $50 million, the district does not have those funds sitting in a bank account, or we would start building a project already today anyway. The board will very likely have to start initiating some of those levies that have never been levied before, and so it is inevitable. This plan that we've spent the last several years, I say we because I've only been part of it 9 months, but it's been a very well thought out plan that's delivered us to this date, and now we have a very important question coming on May 7th.
Maybe if you could just touch on the size of the school and kind of how you guys came to that that number?
You bet. Well, the reality is of the existing high school, correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, but I believe we're saving 40% or so of the square footage of that existing building. So we're saving the 1997 additions that were kind of around the gyms, as well as saving those gyms. So we're being extremely frugal when it comes to space and wanting to make sure that we get the very most bang for our buck. Through multiple years of evaluating this process, that's what's boiled down to this right now, where we actually can gain a couple of courts, some indoor space for our patrons throughout the longer winter months that occasionally we have here in North Dakota, and do that for a cost savings versus knocking all that stuff down and building new. So everything's made great sense. We've got a great plan in place to knock down the building after we move into the new building, so we don't have displacement and educational costs of trying to figure out what to do with over 1,000 kiddos for a couple years during construction. So the high school, the campuses, I've heard a few rumors that maybe the overall campus is large, and there's no question it's not big. However, like CTE, for instance, is a big function of that school. It's kind of the backbone of the design of this school, and we don't have a CTE center somewhere else in town to take our kids to. Obviously, that does exist down the road in Bismarck, and so lots of times we get those comparisons. But when it comes down to a cost per square footage, we are sitting extremely well. I know, I think I've heard we're somewhere around $245 or so a square foot. $254. Got those numbers backwards. $254 a square foot, which is extremely low for a building such as that. So. We've got auditorium seating for 800 planned in the school. We've got gym, as Ron said, 2,500 to 3,000 seats in the gym. No empty classrooms from day one. However, growth ability to move into that school to house 1,600 students. That's the plan. We don't want to open the doors in 2 years and find out we should have added on even more, but 1,600 is about the limit, and I anticipate looking at our predictive numbers. I'm not comfortable going beyond 10 years, but somewhere in that 10 to 15 year time period, if we continue to experience the growth that we're seeing right now today, Dickinson will have some conversations going on whether or not we want to add on to that school and make it the largest school in the state, or build a second high school in Dickinson. So we'll see, obviously, down the road, 15 years or so, what that may look like, but that's the growth that we're anticipating.
In relation to Commissioner Frederick's property tax question, I know you have a calculator currently out there. Residents are not going to see that right away, right?
That is correct, Sarah. We anticipate about 25%. So that the property tax calculator calculates what the full tax impact will be after all $115 million of bonds have been sold. So we anticipate about 25%. You would see a 25% in year one, and then about another half of that, and then the final half. So it breaks it up into kind of thirds. So it would be 3 years down the road before any taxpayers would see the full 100% of the $19.38 per $100,000 of taxable increase per month.
Dr. Harker, what would you say are the most common misconceptions that you're hearing throughout the community?
A couple misconceptions. Number one, still ongoing conversations why we built the middle school first and not the high school. However, it's been evident to me through the research as a newbie that I've done that the conversation was never one or the other. The conversation was which one first. So we're certainly trying to rectify that. There's, as Ron said, social media is great for getting information out, but unfortunately at times it's great for spreading inaccurate information, and it just takes wildfire. I've heard rumors that we built the middle school for $15 million. Why is the high school $115 million? All of those kinds of things. I know back in 2014, looking through the papers as well, as the decision was made to build the middle school and priority over the high school, they were still anticipating the high school would cost over $100 million at that juncture. So I feel like we've actually done very well to kind of delay that decision 5 years. Here we're sitting at 2019 and still be sitting at that $108 million for an overall project. That's more testament that this is a very frugal project with no extra bells and whistles other than what's necessary. Any other rumors,
a couple
Ron?
that I've heard is the demolition of the building is not included in the cost. That's not true. It is included in the cost. The CTE center is not CTE part is not included in the cost. Yes, it is included in the cost. Those are two of the biggest ones that I've had to talk to people about. And the main part of the building was built in '67. And I've had a lot of people ask, well, it hasn't been maintained, or, well, that's not true. It's been maintained very well over since '67. I compare it to my knees. My knee, I've got a problem with the knee, I've had a number of surgeries, I'm gonna have a new one eventually. It wears out. That building has seen hundreds of people day in and day out since 1967, and it's wearing out. And it's just time to modernize it and to get us into the 21st century for education.
Maybe just touch on, some of the other, like the security of the building, one of the reasons that what we have now, and, excuse me, what the future looks like in the new building, and then maybe the timeline on if it passes, the construction schedule and kind of the idea when it would open.
You bet. Well, we're anticipating upon passage of the bond, construction would start this fall, and we are with a target goal of occupying that school in the fall of 2021. So we would start the school year, at that juncture.
Security? I can
Security,
speak to that.
oh yes, please do.
I spent many sleepless nights as a principal trying to figure out how to make that building as safe as possible. Those of you that are familiar with it, there's nooks and crannies and doors all over the place. My third year as a principal, I was involved directly in a live lockdown. It's very scary for the students, the parents, the staff, and everyone involved. Trying to keep somebody from coming into the building when we have classes outside in another building, and when kids are coming in, somebody can walk in. Unless you see it, you're not going to see it. This new building is going to take care of a lot of that with the access and the security that they have as far as coming and going type of thing. But to me, that was my number one priority, the safety of our students and our staff. And I think this new building will do a great deal to enhance that safety.
Yeah, the existing new construction, the existing main gyms and stuff that we're going to keep, that 40% of square footage, that will be tied together by a walkway that's all enclosed into the new construction component. So there will not be any need for kiddos to go outside anymore in the bad weather. And of course, obviously, that greatly enhances our security for our entire footprint, keeping kids safe.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Good luck. Right. With that is the end of our timetable items. We will move back up to public safety and continue with Officer Clauser, if he's still here, on the annual report.
Okay, let's see if we can get this thing closed out. So, moving on back where we were with just a couple of the big cases that you may be interested in hearing about. We had a suspicious death over at St. Luke's Nursing Home, which ultimately led to a criminal charges on a family member of the resident there. A counterfeit ring where we had about 35 businesses in town that were victims to a large-scale passing of counterfeit bills, 20s, 100s. Took us back to a ring of culprits, and ultimately got the Secret Service involved on that, and ended up across state lines down in the South Dakota, across the state of North Dakota, but got a federal indictments on those individuals involved with that. Had a stabbing on the south side about summertime of last year that we were eventually able to locate 2 suspects involved in that and get both of them criminally charged, along with the driver of the getaway vehicle in that instance. And that was down on Meadows Drive specifically. So next slide. So moving on into our task force report. As you can see there, the big one I want to highlight is the participated in 88 cases in 2018 versus 131 in 2017. Most of the numbers in 2018 are going to be down, and be reasonable to ask why are we seeing a decrease in those areas. And there was a period of time there where there was a focus on some large-scale conspiracy investigations. It was very lengthy, time-consuming. You have to really disregard a lot of the smaller end stuff, focusing on some bigger picture things. And then about mid-year, we came into a transitional period of bodies in our task force, which you guys are familiar with some of those conversations I know from previous meetings. And so a combination of that, and then the transition of personnel in there, and some vacancies, and then trying to get other individuals trained back up to rocking and rolling, there was just a downturn in activity of sorts. And so it's, I think, the highlight 2018, our last 2 months when we were situated and had supervision, the leadership in place, and our bodies back in place, we did see an increase at the end of 2018. So, next slide. Some numbers there you can kind of peruse on your own and see for the purpose of drugs that were seized, methamphetamine and marijuana, clearly at the top of what our task force is dealing with. There was a decrease in the heroin and the fentanyl, and we attribute that to some arrests that occurred in late 2017, where we had 7 individuals that were federally indicted and curbed a lot of what was taking place here in Dickinson at that level, but certainly is a drug that is still around, just not as prevalent as that time. And to be noted there, as of recently, I had my task force officer, she was here a little bit ago. We have seen a rise in cocaine again here in 2018 for a peculiar reason, not certain just yet that they're working on, but there's been a large string of it that has surfaced and is back here in the community that they're dealing with. So, next slide. And so it's just some photographs there of some seizures and things that they thought maybe you guys could see and look at, just to kind of show some of their activity and where they're at and what they're into. You see a grow operation there in the middle, cash there at the bottom and such. One of the questions I get commonly asked by some community members that they always want to know is like current rates, street values on certain drugs. And so currently right now here locally, per gram, which so about 28.35 grams equals an ounce, but cocaine is between $120 and $150 per gram. Methamphetamine is $100 per gram, pretty solid. Marijuana is $10 to $25 per gram. Our prescription pills are ranging between $30 and $75 per tablet, and our heroin, which is usually sold in 1/10 of a gram, is between $60 and $100 right now. So comparatively, that would vary across the state depending on where you're at, but that's where we are right now. So next slide. If there's no other questions, I'll introduce Lieutenant Mike Hannell, who will come up and talk about the K-9 report and such. So.
Commissioners, any questions or comments for Officer Clauser?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sergeant Clauser. Vice President and Commissioners, good evening. I'll breeze through quickly the K-9 and SWAT portion of it. And before I do get to that, just a small side note, the official full version of our report that you have in front of you is also available online. We put that online on our website, dickinsonpd.com. And so if citizens want to peruse that as well, obviously this is just our condensed version, but that'll have a couple nicer pictures in there and whatnot, so feel free to have at that. So for our K-9 report in 2018, next slide, we had 3 K-9s running at that time. K-9 Gambit, which was paired with now Sheriff Corey Lee, K-9 Kahlo with Senior Patrol Officer Jaden Peters, and K-9 Norman with Senior Patrol Officer Hunter Easterling. All 3 dogs were very active throughout the year. K-9 Gambit was our top narcotics dog. He had quite a few searches, resulting in approximately 7 narcotic-related arrests and several public relations events. Kahlo, shortly after the 41 narcotics searches and 8 related arrests, heavily involved in public relations as well. K-9 Norman, though he is our PR hog for the department with 34 public relations events. He has since been paired with a new handler. Senior Patrol Officer Easterling has transferred over to detective, so he's now with a different handler right now. And K-9 Gambit he retired out with Sheriff Lee once he departed the department. Next slide.
Officer, can we go back to that last slide, please? When you have a search, is there a time when you have 2 dogs there or all 3 dogs?
Typically not. It's generally if they're on duty. Typically, if it's a traffic stop, and the stopping officer would have that if there's an on-duty narcotics team.
So you got 45, 41, and 34, a certain number of searches there. So it could be lower than that total searches.
No, typically those are the ones they log. So they've if in the course of the year, that's typically the amount of searches they will be running as an individual unit.
Okay, thank you.
Some of the more notable events, I believe the first one with K9 Kahlo, the 16 pounds of marijuana, that was, I believe, 2 days after he got back from certification or something like that. He got his first fine, and it was a very substantial one. K9 Norman, again, our PR hog, he's for 34. He's also the face of the DARE program. The kids really like him. He interacts very well with the kids. And then K9 Gambit and Sheriff Lee, they were very instrumental in the schools during that year. In addition to the street level work that they do, they also, in addition to certifying it with different agencies, they also compete as part of those certifications. SPO Easterling and K9 Norman received the Top Dog Award during their annual certification in Camp Ripley. Sergeant Lee taken numerous honors, 2 first place and a 2nd place at various locations and different associations when they ran those trials. Next slide. As far as the SWAT team on it, it's been another down year, more or less, very vanilla in nature, which I guess would be a good thing. We were at 8 callouts for 2018, and I believe the next slide depicts those a little bit further. Most of these incidents that rose to the level of activating a SWAT team were actually resolved either by on-duty or on-scene officers before the first SWAT member could arrive. We did, the first one we did successfully deploy to was up in Killdeer, very first part of the year, to assist Killdeer PD and BCI in apprehending an aggravated assault suspect who assaulted his girlfriend, and there was a weapon involved in that instance. Shortly after that, we were contacted by some bounty hunters out of California to apprehend a suspect with outstanding weapons violation warrants. He was located in a facility just north of town, out in the county. He was apprehended successfully. And the last one we more or less officially deployed on was a wide area search for an elderly suspect with suspected mental health issues that fled patrol officers on a traffic stop. Ended up bailing out of the vehicle north of Gladstone, and this was, I believe, February or March, really cold outside, a lot of snow. And we used our armored vehicle, the Bearcat, to assist deputies in searching for the suspect simply because of the snowfall that was on the ground. We pulled several deputies out of the section lines that they got stuck in. And in addition, we also had our thermal camera on our Bearcat to be able to assist in locating this individual at the time. Next slide.
Lieutenant Handel.
Sure.
What's the response time for the Southwest Top Complete?
All depends on the situation and in our staffing, our manpower. Most of our members are on duty at any given time, so they'll just change out gear and go. Others are called from home or wherever they're at. But typically we see about a 10 to 15 minute response time to the Public Safety Center, and then we generally deploy from there. Training is really an important factor for our team. We have to make sure we're staying ahead of the curve on different topics that are out there. We averaged 106 hours, both in-house and remote training in 2018, including items such as policy review, our necessary certifications for different devices. We also integrated with the fire department last year. We really haven't done that, but several high-profile events around the nation last year involving structure fires and correlated with armed suspects that were still inside that structure. We felt that training with the fire department to establish some sort of procedure if we need to fight a fire in addition to having a SWAT response. So we integrated them last year as well. Next slide. Just briefly, our roster, we were currently 21 SWAT operators from both our department, Stark County Sheriff's Department, and Dunn County Sheriff's Department. And our hostage negotiation team had 10 members from various agencies as well. And then the last thing I'll touch on here briefly is just our the grants that we applied for throughout the year and were ultimately awarded. The big chunk of that was a Homeland Security grant for $45,000 that was used to purchase a mobile ballistic shield, which is basically our Bearcat, but condensed in a version that we could actually push down a hallway. It's basically a mobile ballistic bunker with wheels on it. So that was a big chunk of it. We also purchased some more SWAT vest grants out of that. The DOJ VEST grant was our yearly grant that we apply for and we commonly get, and that's to outfit new officers with ballistic vests. And finally, a DOT traffic safety grant. That's typically where we see our underage enforcement grants, our seatbelt grants, and so on and so forth. So a lot of these are, could potentially have been absorbed, locally through the local tax base, but obviously this is a prime opportunity to be able to get funds from the federal level and offset those costs, and while in doing so, providing the best equipment for our team. So with that, any questions further on that?
Any questions for Lieutenant Hannell before he steps away? Comments?
Lieutenant Hannell, you do the social media as well, don't you?
Yes.
You do a very good job.
I appreciate that.
Yes,
Yes,
very
okay.
good job at keeping the public notified and informed and adding some humor in there every once in a while. Shows that you guys are people too.
Yes, well, that's what we're aiming for. So thank you.
Thanks, Lieutenant Hannell.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up our report. Like Lieutenant Hannell says, the full report's available on our website, www.dickinsonpd.com. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be glad to answer it.
Any questions for Chief Dossinger?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to number 5 on our agenda, engineering. We have a task order for Highlands Engineering on Museum Drive. City Engineer Kubis.
Thank you, Vice President Frederick and Commissioners. In front of you is a task order with Highlands Engineering for $5,740. This task order would be to complete a plat along Museum Drive just south of Prairie Outpost Park. We've talked about this property in meetings past. Last year, the direction from Commission was to get all the adjacent landowners on board, which we had last year. As you can see, this is the block that we're looking at just south of Museum Drive. The plat would involve the shaded portion of that block, which is now all owned by the City of Dickinson. The plat would just dedicate some more right-of-way to Museum Drive and split off parcels that would align with the current privately owned parcels. At that point, the next step would be to transfer those parcels to the adjacent landowners. Our hope is, if we can get this task order approved, it would be to be put on the May Planning and Zoning agenda. Before that, reach out to these landowners one more time, make sure they're still on board, that none of the properties have changed hands in the past few months. Then again, like I said, create these deeds, and just as an FYI to you all and to the public, we would hope that the transfer of this land would pay back to the city in approximately 14 years, just based on the increased property value of these residential lots that would add several hundred square feet to the backyards of these properties. So again, with that, I can open it up to any questions you might have.
Any questions for Engineer Kubis regarding the task order? Hearing none, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Vice Chair, move to approve task force.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion regarding this task order? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Trustum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Task order is approved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kubis. We'll move to number 6, Public Works, and we have a report, the 2018 Water Reclamation Annual Report by Utilities Manager Stack.
Thank you, Vice President Friedrich and Commissioners. You have to excuse me, a little bit hoarse. Must be all that great vacation time that I spent down in Florida here the last couple of weeks. So, anyway, starting with our annual report, just a little bit of background information. I think all 3 commissioners have seen this, and we have a water reclamation facility that was commissioned in 2014. It's a biological nutrient removal facility, which means it's very advanced. Also, the style of system is an IFAS treatment system. That is a system that is made by Veolia. has these little round discs in it that make it a little bit more compact in size. It's also has sludge that we use aerobic digestion, and we also do have an important part of it is our reuse water distribution system. Oh, I guess I'm not driving the bus. Okay. All right, last year, in 2018, 655 million gallons of treated effluent went to the Heart River. 134 million gallons of treated effluent went to reuse, which is Endeavor Marathon Refinery. Is currently Marathon. It goes through, it seems, a change every year. And then also ND Energy we did have a contract with them to go ahead and sell fracking water. Also, we did apply 510 metric tons of biosolids in 2018. Our reuse water value total, that's both from ND Energy and from the refinery, just about $600,000. All right, our outlook for 2019, always the fun part. Well, we did send a new public request for a quote for reuse water. We just got one back, or we got it back yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to completely review it, but we had just one response. Reuse for Marathon, we're looking probably at about 65 million gallons, a little bit of an increase from last year. However, the interesting thing about Marathon is that they are changing over their refinery from crude oil to reusable soybean oil, basically biodiesel. So they're in the conversion process right now. In conversation with their staff, their estimated consumption of both reuse water and then, of course, water coming back to us in the form of sewage is going to increase, and it looks like it's going to be basically doubling the amounts of reuse water that we sell to them and doubling the amount of sewage coming back to us. So some very significant revenue increases. The total flow that we're going to estimate for the water reclamation for 2019, we think we're going to have about 800 million gallons. That's pretty consistent for the last 2 or 3 years. Last year, total amount of flow is about 792 million gallons. And then we estimate that we'll probably have about 520 metric tons of biosolids that will actually land apply. And this is onto land that the city does own. Continued outlook, we have some projects that are moving actually quite nicely. We're going to continue with the design of our septic hauler dump station. This will be located at what we call Lift Station 22, which is the west lift station that is west of town. Implementation of a manifest system. This is to keep track of all the haulers that are actually dumping into this system. And actually, we already have the manifests complete. It's just that we're going to have to go ahead and present it to the existing haulers that we have out in the system. I think we have like 11 or 12 different haulers that work within the city of Dickinson. Excuse me, one moment. Okay, we are going to look at a new sewer ordinance, see if we can get that finalized and passed by the end of the year. And then we're also looking at other potential wholesale customers with and or for our reuse water. We want to go ahead and look. This would be hand in hand with the sewer ordinance, and that is to look at some code changes for other waste disposal opportunities. In other words, other source of revenues that we could do with the types of waste that we have commercially, basically, in Dickinson. And then also, I'm going to say maybe this year we may not have any fracking water that we're going to be selling. However, we do have opportunities for reuse water for irrigation. Right now, the cell number 4 is completely full, so I have roughly about 180, 190 million gallons of water out there that I'd like to go ahead and at least turn over. That way I can go ahead and, again, turn over the water that I have in there and keep it fresh. I don't want it to turn into kind of like Lake Patterson and that kind of thing. We do get blue algae blooms out there as well. Oh, okay, that was the next one. Okay, that's not mine. Are there any questions with my annual report?
Any questions for Utilities Manager Stack from Commissioners? Hearing none?
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stack. All right, moving on to item 7, planning. We have a final plat to consider for the Vetter subdivision. Planning Director Hadley.
Yes, thank you, sir. First item is a final plat. It's a 10-acre site divided into 2 5-acre lots. I believe the applicants here in the audience, the Planning Commission reviewed it, made a formal recommendation to approve it. Staff would approve it as well. There haven't been any comments against it. It is in our ETZ, which is it's located kind of southeast of town.
Commissioners, any questions for Director Hadley regarding the final plat for the Vetter subdivision, which would be resolution, I believe, 11/2019?
I believe so, yes.
Mr. Vice President, I would move to approve resolution number 11-2019.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion or concerns? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Trustum?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion is carried. Item B on the planning agenda would be a special use permit for 2735 Country Oaks Drive, and that would be resolution 12-2019. Director Hadley.
Thank you, sir. Yes, this is a group daycare special use permit application. It has gone through the process, been state approved, went through the Planning Commission. Planning Commission recommended approval. Staff would also recommend approval. The applicant actually did do a very good job of getting about 8 neighbors, adjoining neighbors, to all sign off on the application as well. So her neighborhood fully embraces it. It's up by Prairie Rose.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Hadley regarding the special use permit? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Vice Chair, move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Trustum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. 12-2019. Looks like we have nothing from building and codes. And we've done our timetables. That moves us to number 10. Public issues of city concern not on the agenda. If there's anybody in the audience that has a concern that we did not have on the agenda that you would like to present to commissioners, this is your time to come up and do that. Seeing none, we'll move on. Item number 11, commissioners, anything not on the agenda you guys would like to discuss or address? Hearing none, we'll move on to the final one. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.